We're in the midst of our series on relationship roundtable, and so it kind of makes it nice, even though we're not able to have everybody here in the building. We're just glad you're with us online. I know that there's people joining us on Facebook and at our Asbury AG online. Hey, if you're there this morning, would you just jump on real quick? Would you type in hi? Just let us know how we're doing. Because part of what we want to do is we want to make sure that this is plenty interactive. And so I'll be tracking Facebook highs and stuff like that. And Rachel's going to be taking care of church online. And so as we go through this, as we've done before, if there are ideas or things you'd like to share as a part of the conversation, we want to invite you just to text in, or you can just comment on Facebook or church online. But today we are going to, as we continue our series, I got to juggle all my pieces, is today we're going to talk about battling well. So we're thinking through this series because we think that if we're going to live God's purpose for our life, and if we're going to live it well, we have to do relationships well. And so we've been talking about a few things. We've been talking about the importance of love. We've been talking last week the importance of communication. And today we're going to kind of touch on the subject of conflict. And I think there's a whole lot of irony that our parking lot looks like a skating rink this morning because we're tempted to invite people over to come on over, bring your skates, get your hockey sticks, and we'll have fun. And it always reminds me of the old joke that says, hey, I went to a fight the other day and a hockey game broke out. And I don't know about you, but if you watch hockey, one of the great things about hockey is not only the speed and all the fun stuff, but there are times where the guys drop the gloves. So for all the people who are out there that are my hockey peeps, if you've been watching the Four Nations tournament, last night was USA versus Canada. And that was an amazing game. And in the first 9 seconds of the game, there were 3 fights. And so, you don't need to play hockey when you're having all these fun little fight things going on. And so it was kind of fun just watching that game unfold. But I don't know about you and you guys as well, but fights, they just seem to happen, right? They just difficulty, conflict, that just seems to be a part of the environment. And it's always interesting how fights get started. And so I found some of the jokes that I like, which are and that's how the fight started jokes. And so, for example, one of them is like this. A wife asked her husband, what's on the TV? And he responded, dust. And that's how the fight started. I like that one. Another one is this one. A few years ago, I thought it would be a good idea to purchase a cemetery plot as a birthday present for my mother-in-law. This is not me writing. This is someone else, right? And the following year, he didn't get her a present. And she was not too happy about this. And so he questioned, why didn't I get her a present? And I responded, well, you still haven't used the birthday present which I purchased for you last year. And that's how the fight started, right? So, it's always interesting. There's always easy ways by which conflict happens, whether it's in the home, whether it's at work, whether it's, driving. It's always interesting how quickly conflict arises, and it's really interesting because we all manage conflict in different ways because we've all experienced it. And online, if you're with us, so generally when we've been starting, we invite you to begin answering a question. And you don't have to answer this one online, but it is something that I want you to think about. As you think about your world and times where you experience conflict, whether it's in the home, whether it's at work, whether it's driving, whatever it may be, when you experience conflict, what are your patterns? So when you're in the midst of, like that dissonance that's going on, what are the patterns that seem to arise in how you manage conflict? And so just for giggles. Now, I got Rachel up here and Levita and Dwayne. None of us know anything about conflict. Whether it's Rachel and I have been married 30 years. We haven't had a fight yet. She's been right every time. And so we just figured that one out. So that makes it good.
27 years of pure bliss.
27 years of...
Never misunderstanding.
Never misunderstanding. Did you guys ever have the conflict over how you squeeze the toothpaste? Bottom or top? Middle? You didn't do that one?
Just the kitchen cupboards.
Ooh. Which one's that one?
I have no idea.
No, Dwayne does.
Apparently they're
Dwayne.
not supposed to be open
Oh, apparently the cupboards aren't supposed to be
All of
open
them.
Left open.
constantly.
constantly.
It's easier to get to things if they're always open.
Yeah, why do we even have doors on them? Just take them off, right?
I'm with Levita on that. Shut the doors.
Shut the cupboard doors.
Shut
Like pro-life tip right there.
That's right. How to make your marriage happy, keep the doors closed. It's also a great parenting lesson, too, to teach the kids. Yes. Please keep the door closed, Matthew. Anyway, as we think through these different conflict things, right? So as you think about conflict, for you, what are some of the patterns that you have when conflict or when tensions arise, just in the generalities of life? What are some of the things that you notice about your patterns? I know what mine are, or some of mine are. If there's a conflict, I lean into it. That's what I do. It's shocking. If there's conflict, I'm like, I grew up playing hockey, and so maybe this whole idea of it's okay
Drop the gloves.
It's okay to drop the gloves. It's just part of the game. So, but for me, part of my personality is when there's conflict, I generally lean into it, and that can be a good thing, and it can also not be a good thing at times. What about you, Pastor Dwayne? What are some of your patterns when it comes to conflict?
My initial desire is to grab the bricks, build a wall, shut the person out and all their aggressive behavior, and
We have such a great working relationship.
try to figure out why are they yelling at me, even if they're not. I'm sure they are. Inside their head, they're yelling at me for some reason.
All right, so
That's my desire. My initial desire is just to be quiet and avoid the conflict. Just like, okay, there's probably a way out of this without actually having a conflict. So that's my initial desire.
All right, good. What about you, Levita?
I want to solve the conflict because I don't like conflict. So
Okay.
let's solve it, which is really fun when he's like, no, build the wall. It's okay. And I'm like, no, let's do this. Let's figure this out. So
you're a lean into the conflict.
well, I don't know if I'm a lean in because I'm like, no, we can solve this. We can solve this. We don't need to have conflict. We can solve this. And sometimes that's not the right time.
That's not okay. Good. Rachel, what about you?
I would say my way of dealing with conflict is similar to Dwayne, not necessarily building a wall, but just walking out of it and not dealing with it. And I would rather, if I ignore it, maybe it'll just go away all on its own.
That's why we have no fights in our relationship.
That's right.
There.
I ignore
Right
them,
there.
and he leans in, and I back out.
So it's kind of interesting. So like with personalities, how different personalities, because I know that we all deal with conflict in different ways, and sometimes it's a function of our personality, sometimes our experience, sometimes we want to lean into it, sometimes we become defensive.
So the reason we've had such bliss is because it took me 10 years to realize that when Dwayne said, okay, he wasn't saying, okay, you won. He was saying, okay, I'm not going to argue.
Oh, that's what it means.
And I was like, oh, I won. Okay. He's just like, okay.
Yeah, and so that's what I think is really interesting is how different people deal with it. And again, part of this is actually connected with personality. Some people will attack or they'll become defensive. Other people will isolate others. Like they'll close them off. They'll write someone off. Other times there'll be the submission where they're kind of like, fine, okay. And the submission is not real submission. It's just okay. Right? And then sometimes people will also criticize, become very critical in the midst of conflict and dealing with that. And so this is why I think this is such an important conversation, because conflict is kind of like this inevitable thing that happens in life, and we all deal with it in different ways. And the way we deal with it always isn't the best way. And sometimes instead of seeing relationships grow and progress through the conflict, sometimes the conflict becomes a reason for relationships to fall apart, or for a tension or a dividing and all these different things. And so the big idea that I just want to think about as we talk about battling well today is that healthy relationships require healthy habits when handling conflict. And so that's a mouthful, but healthy relationships require healthy habits when handling conflict. And so we're going to look at a bunch of verses this morning as well as share some of our thoughts on this. And so like one of my grounding thoughts about conflict, and probably the reason why I'm okay dealing with it at times, is because I have this thought that conflict is inevitable. Wherever there's motion, there's friction, right? And so wherever you get people and movement, at some point, it's going to happen. Now, I remember, Rachel, you and I, our first fight, I didn't even realize.
You didn't even realize we were having a
how
fight.
egregious I had, like going, what? I totally failed in some way, and I have no clue how. Do you want to share that one?
Are you talking about?
I want to make sure that's why I was like.
I know. I'm like, which
share the
fight are
first
we
one,
talking
honey.
about?
The one.
The very first one?
Yeah.
When I said, "Hey, I'm going to take the day off work. Let's spend the day together."
That's
that
the one
one?
I was thinking of. See, we're on the same page. This is good.
Yeah. So this was before we were married. We were dating, and I took the day off of work. And I said, "Hey, I took the day off work. Let's spend the day together." And he was like, "Great, great." And so I got up in the morning. I got ready, and I was waiting. Now, you have to remember this was like 30 some years ago, so there was no cell phones, there was no texting. So I was in my apartment waiting, and you were in your dorm room sleeping.
Because I was in college, and it was a Saturday.
And it was a Saturday, and I was under the assumption that we were going to spend the day together. And you went to go have breakfast with Wade and your roommates. And so you weren't even in your dorm room then to answer the phone call. And so I'm calling and calling and calling and calling. And I couldn't go to the dorms because girls were off limits from the boys' dorms. And so I couldn't contact you. So I was just sitting at my apartment alone, ready to spend the day with you, and you were not to be found. And we actually didn't connect, I don't think, until after lunch, right?
Yes, it was after lunch.
Yeah, it was after noon. And I finally reached him in his dorm room, and he was like, "Hey!" And I was like, "Hey, are we going to meet together?" And you were like, oh, yeah, yep. What do you want to do? And I'm like, "I'm here at my apartment waiting." And so he slowly walked over, not knowing what he was coming into.
It was a chilly day.
It was a chilly
It was
day.
like one of those, like, oh, something. Well, and I think it's interesting because there was no maliciousness in my heart, and I will confess that. No maliciousness in my heart. That was just youthful ignorance, right? But it's interesting, all the different things that actually create conflict. So you're mentioning that there's assumptions. There can be a sense of violation, that somebody's wronged you. It could be an obligation. You feel somebody owes you something. We can have different expectations. We can interpret things different. Like, there are so many ways by which conflict can arise. And I think that, again, because it's such an inevitable part of life, if we're going to do life well, we best learn how to manage and how to work through it. And gratefully, here we are 30 years later, and we are almost perfect at this. Almost perfect, but we're
Not even close.
I think we've said before, there are no experts on this. We're just kind of like sharing some of the things that we've kind of thought and learned. And so what I want to do is I want to look through some different ideas from the Bible that I think actually deals with conflict. And the first thing that I just kind of want to talk about, that because there's conflict, what are the best ways to begin to manage conflict? And I think this ties into what we were talking about last week, which was communication. Communication is so important in the midst of conflict. And in order to do this, just recognizing off the front, when you begin to, at the front, when dealing with conversations or dealing with conflict, you just have to prepare yourself and be ready for difficult conversations, right? Like, I think difficult conversations is just a part of this entire thing. And the reason I think this is an interesting point is that so much of the New Testament is actually written as a consequence of difficult conversations that need to take place, especially the Apostle Paul. And he gets really transparent about this in 2 Corinthians, which is a letter that he's writing to the Corinthian church. And part of the reason he's writing it is because he had written another letter that we call 1 Corinthians. and then probably something else in the midst of it. But if you've ever read 1 Corinthians, there's a little bit of tension in that letter. And I want to just read through this, and then we'll kind of talk about this. But 2 Corinthians 7, 8 through 10 says this. It says, even if I caused you sorrow by my letters, I do not regret it, though I did regret it. I love the honesty of this. Have you ever had those moments you're like going, okay, yeah, I didn't want to have the difficult conversation, you know, and there's a part like I don't regret having it, but in the moment I was like going, dude, don't even want to deal with it. And he's like, listen, I do not regret it, though I did regret it. And then he says this, which I think is so interesting. I see that my letter hurt you, but only for a little while. Yet now I am happy, not because you were made sorry, but because your sorrow led you to repentance. And the idea there is that because we process through the dissonance of conflict, it actually led to a good and godly change. For you became sorrowful as God intended, so you were not harmed. And I think this is really interesting. My letter hurt you, but you were not harmed in any way by us. Godly sorrow brings repentance. That leads to salvation and leaves no regret. But worldly sorrow brings death. Okay, so I want to bring you guys in on this one. So as we kind of read through this passage, for you, what are some of the ideas that just kind of jump out to you? If you just don't mind leaving the passage up there, please. Thanks. Just as you look at that passage, what are some of the things that stick out to you with that?
I think the last sentence, the godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation. And just recognizing that, our relationship with God it leads to the right kind of sorrow, not just I'm sure there are times it's a guilt-laden sorrow, but yet it's the good kind of guilt, not the bad kind of guilt. That's guilt that's progressive, not diminishing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I think that's great. What about you, Levita? As you kind of reflect on that, what kind of sticks out to you?
I think a lot of times, I think of what the people who were receiving this letter must have been feeling, and they had a relationship with Paul. This wasn't just this strange out of the blue letter. And a lot of times when we have to have those really hard conversations, our relationship really matters.
Yep.
There is so much trust in this, and I'm sure there was some knowing. I think it's really important when we have conflict, whether we are the giver of conflict or the receiver of conflict, to really try to hear the intention behind it.
Yep.
Because Paul's intention is not to destroy them, like Dwayne was saying. He wanted a change, and change is hard, and change is painful. But that doesn't mean his intention was to destroy.
Yeah.
And we often see conflict as bad, but conflict is sometimes necessary because it needs to lead to a change.
Yeah.
And there are so many times in our lives that we do need to change. Our behavior, our expectations, whatever we're doing is not healthy. And those conversations are really hard because they're truthful. We do need to change, and those hurt, but it leads to a good change. And so I think in this, and when I look at conflict going forward, if you are in the middle of a conflict, or if you are experiencing conflict, is to really look at what the motivation is. Why are they saying this? Is it something that you do need to hear, or is it something they think you need to hear? Because that motivation can change how our heart receives the correction. They may be wrong, but they still might be saying it out of true care. And I think that changes how we respond to the conflict.
Yeah, and I love the part in this where it says that, I'm happy, not because you were made sorry. I know that sometimes we can have that need to say something because it makes us feel better or to make us feel good, but it's not necessarily in the interest of actually advancing or growing the relationship.
I remember a time I had somebody who was telling me all this stuff they thought I should be doing. And they were off base. They had misinterpreted. They were really, it was super fun, super fun. But I just remember in that time, I had just been talking with somebody about listening to motivation and hearing the heart, and I just kept reminding myself, they think they're helping. They're doing this because they want to help. They're and it changed how I was to receive it, because instead of just getting all like, well, you're just a jerk, like it was more of a, okay, they think they're helping. They're intending to help, and it changed how I was able to respond to them. And I think that is really important, because how we respond in conflict really dictates where it's going to go, whether it's going to be a huge train wreck or something that builds on.
That's great. That's great. Rachel, as you kind of look at this, what kind of sticks out to you?
Well, I was on the same wavelength as Levita there, and also just the like what she just said, the way that we receive it, or the way we're going into the conflict. So being defensive. So like a couple people online talked about that they popped up as defensive, like when something comes at them, there's a wall or defensiveness to trying to make your own opinion known or your own thoughts known, instead of and defending what your direction is. And so here with Paul, when he says, I see that my letter hurt you, and that's the part that but only for a little while. And I think, like Levita said, when we come into conflict or into a conversation, to remember that hopefully that we are not in it to hurt that other person, but that we're trying to bring about resolution to the conflict, and to remember that they are and we are in our relationship together, that's the point. We're trying to bring about a good resolution, not catfighting at each other. But and hurt can come in the words that we say to one another, but trying to receive it and trying to give the words that we're giving to someone else in a loving manner, not an attacking manner.
Not an attacking, absolutely. And I think this raises the question, why? Because all of this is around this idea of having difficult conversations. And, so why do you think people have a hard time with difficult conversations? Dwayne?
Nobody likes to be wrong. I mean, really, none of us like to be wrong, and there's that. I think that difficult conversations, there is that possibility that I might be wrong, and that's not easy for anybody that I'm aware.
Well, and there's that, like we had been talking, there's a vulnerability, and sometimes the person you're in a conversation with has broken trust.
Yeah.
And that is hard, because the reason you're having the conversation is because trust was broken. But then how do you rebuild the trust? And sometimes if you've been really, really hurt, you don't want to rebuild the trust. Yeah. You want to protect yourself. You want to just block it off.
Yeah.
You don't want to be hurt again. And even if that person hasn't hurt you before, if you've been in a similar situation, your history in conflict can influence your future in conflict.
Yeah, and so sometimes the reason we avoid conflict is because we don't want to be hurt, or we just the emotion of it, which we're going to touch on in just a moment. Rachel, what about you? Why do you think people have a hard time with difficult conversations?
They just say it because they go first, which is fine. But I think
you get to go first next.
You'll get to go first.
No,
the
that's
next
okay.
time.
That's all right.
My bad.
No, it's okay. But yeah, I just think we don't like to have it because it brings up our own weaknesses. It brings up our own insecurities. It brings up our own, maybe it brings up where we failed. And we don't like to fail. We don't like to be wrong. And so if we can avoid that, then we would. And so I just think people, we don't want to be wrong. We don't want to fail. And we like to put our best face forward. And so we like to avoid it.
Yeah. And I think too that in the culture that we're a part of, it's really easy to get people on your side so you don't have to deal with it, right? And so what happens is we create echo chambers that validate the wrongness that we've experienced or someone else has done, that gives us sometimes the permission to not have to deal with stuff.
So when you were listing your like ways people deal with conflict,
Yeah.
this kind of ties in something that I think I see a lot in culture right now, and this, I don't know, I haven't been alive in other cultures, so I don't know if it's happened through the ages, but people use intelligence to fight their battles. If they're having a conflict, they spew really intelligent sounding things to make the opponent look stupid. And I see that as, so we also don't, in conflict, we don't want to look stupid. Like, I don't want to say something because what if I look stupid? And people will use their intelligence to diminish whomever is against them.
Yeah.
And that becomes a very personalized attack that we need to avoid.
Yeah.
But it's so easy, because if I'm smart and you're dumb, then I'm right. And anything that you misperceive is just because you're dumb.
Yeah.
And it's just an easy way to write people off.
Yeah. Well, and I
So
think that's
dangerous.
that win-lose kind of thing, that often we're approaching conflict with a win-lose kind of proposition, that in order that a conflict needs to be won in such a way that somebody else has to lose. And
That we destroy the opposition.
so if we can diminish another, then we can win the thing. And that doesn't lead what I think Rachel was talking about, that the goal of conflict is actually reconciliation and the growth through this stuff. And so how do we work through it? So I'll begin with Rachel on this question, just so that she doesn't, so we don't start a fight later. So how does the gospel help us manage conflict better? So you've been following Jesus for a while. So how has faith in Jesus, what it is that he's done, how does that help you manage conflict better?
Well, I think looking at Jesus himself, how he managed conflict and encounters with people is one way, and also just realizing Jesus wants our best. He wants the best for us, and when conflict comes up to us or things, he's revealing it to bring healing to us, not to destroy us. And so the enemy likes to do it the opposite way. If things come up, it's to grind us down and to make us feel less than, where as followers of Jesus, as Jesus reveals things to us, it's for building us up and to help us become better people. And so when we lean into how Jesus handles conflict and being okay with realizing I might be doing it wrong, and that I need to reevaluate the way I'm going about this. That's a humbling place to be, because we like to be right and we like to think we know how to do it right. And so being in a teachable place is a humbling thing, but it helps us to grow, to be in a teachable place, to receive instruction and receive wisdom in a kind way. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Levita, what about you? Or Dwayne, do you want to go first?
I don't want to steal any answers. Telepathy, I think, and I feel like I said this 2 weeks ago, we were talking, because it's kind of a theme that God reminds me of consistently. So a long time ago, I read a children's book called Carry On, Mr. Bowditch. And it's
yes.
I love that book. It's a great story. And in it, he talks about tripping over chairs in the dark, how you trip over a chair and you get angry and you kick it because you're angry that the chair was in your way. And in this book, written for adolescents, it says, people aren't chairs. And I have to remind myself when I get angry or frustrated because somebody has done something that's in my way, people aren't chairs. We, as Christians, we need to see people as God's creation. Even the ones that are in our way, messing us up, think differently than us, say things differently, are the opposite spectrum of everything. They are created by God. They are not chairs. So loving them as God loves them, remembering that they are precious and you can't kick people.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really important. And that is what I think, as the gospel reminds me over and over and over again, is that we're here to love people, and that's what's important in this life.
Yeah, great. That's awesome. Okay, you have to clean up after that one. You have to top
I
that.
should have gone before her.
Yeah.
that was good stuff. Somebody should marry this lady. Oh my.
She's already married. I don't know.
He put a ring on it.
I do, and yeah, I said this a couple weeks ago. It's the whole, we're created in the image of God, all of us, and I love the Bible just brings that out, and we're all fallen because of sin and wrestle with that, and Jesus approached people with grace and truth. I was just reading the story of the Samaritan woman at the well in John, and how, as you read that story, you think, he's laying out all this stuff about her life, not to hurt her, as the verse, but to help, not to harm her. Even though I'm sure it was painful to have some stranger lay out all your junk right there in a conversation, but to lead her to him, and so it just as we're that's the gospel message, have loving people, and that is the most important. Me being right, wrong, the most important is loving people and being, as one of my mentors when I first started in ministry used to say, being Jesus with skin on. Yeah. And so of doing that.
Yeah, good. And so I think as we talk about this, so I mentioned that conflict is inevitable. Another idea that I have is conflict is emotional. Right? I think that's part of what makes conflict so stirring, is it stirs. It kind of gets us. And part of it is, as we deal with conflict, our emotions can hijack the whole process. Right? All of a sudden, what we're feeling becomes so dominant that sometimes our reasoning falls apart, or our understanding of the relationship. We can lapse into our historical patterns, all these different things. I was thinking about, and I have another passage that I want to think about for a few moments, is in Genesis chapter 4, verses 5 through 7. And so you guys are all familiar with the story. This is where they're offering sacrifices, and then Abel's is approved by God. Cain's offering is not. And then it says this, so Cain became very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Now, I find this a really interesting story. So one of the things I find interesting about this story is we are given no explicit expression of why Abel's sacrifice was accepted over Cain's. Okay, now to me that would be the whole frustrating part, and it's okay, so what is the right sacrifice? That'd be for me well, okay, so what's the right sacrifice? What's the right thing? And it's interesting that the response that God had isn't about the right, but it's about the responsibility of what are you going to do with the emotion that you have when things don't always go as you anticipate or think it's going to be. And he says, sin is crouching at your door, and it desires to have you, but you must, and some translations will say, you must master it. You must rule over it. You mustn't allow your life to be overwhelmed or overcome by your emotion, because he's very angry. He's very angry, and we know how the story goes, that his anger will end up resulting in murder. And So there's this aspect of, because conflict is emotional, what can people do? Because I think this is one of those invariable things. The reason there's conflict is because there's actually this an emotional dissonance that's going on inside of us, something that's not lining up, whether it's a missed expectation, whether it's violation, whether it's any of these different things. My question is what can people do to help themselves and others from being emotionally hijacked in the midst of conflict. Because conflict brings emotion, and again, we got to be careful not allowing the emotion to drive the conversation, but to actually be able to work through some things. So for you, what can people do to help themselves and others from being hijacked emotionally? Does that make sense? It's a fun thing. We'll begin with Dwayne, so that way he can get his answer out. And
okay, so because I'm a slow processor a lot of times, but one of the things I've learned over the years, and you may not know this about me, but I can be unkind and quite poignant with my words if the situation arises. I know there are hurtful things that go through my head at times, and so it's, my walk with Jesus has helped that. Unfortunately, at times my children have had to get through my discipling period as God's teaching me to be a better person. But the verse from James, the being slow to speak, slow to become angry, for conflict, for all of that is one that rings through my head constantly. And sometimes the slow to speak makes the other person really impatient, because I might take forever to have a conversation because it takes
weeks.
Because that is a piece that for me has helped wrestle through the emotional side of conflict when I really want to respond with unkindness, ungodly things.
All right.
Of just pausing and just, okay, how is what I'm about to say or what I want to say going to hurt this person? Is it going to? Okay, I need to pause, because that's just not, God would not want me to say that right now.
So pausing as a strategy before
Right.
speaking is a great thing. What about you, Levita?
I think I should let Rachel go first, because I haven't had to go last yet. So.
Okay, Rachel, you
Okay.
go.
All right. I would say being honest about, like, if we're concerned about our emotions rising up, then just be honest where you are emotionally, right? Like, it's okay to say in the conflict, because we've done this with our kids, and I've done this with my kids as well, and you, and just people.
I'm one of the kids.
Yeah, no, just being honest, like just saying, I'm really angry right now, and recognizing it so that they know, okay, she's angry right now, or I'm very frustrated, and I'm hurt, right? Like, just let the other person know the emotion that you're feeling, and just acknowledging it. I can sometimes be a stuffer, and I know people can be stuffers, and so you stuff it down, not thinking, I'm not going to deal with it right now because we're having a conversation. But if the emotions are going to come out anyways, just say, I'm feeling very angry right now, and just saying it can release some of that emotion, and being able to say it. And if you're really hurt, let the tears come for a minute, like let there be a release of the emotion, not in an unhealthy manner. Like, if you're angry, I don't condone throwing things, right? But it's like, if you're going to have the emotion and the emotion is spilling over, then just acknowledge the emotion, and have that out there. And then, okay, now we know where we are. Let's take a breather if we need to take a breather to come back to this. But just acknowledge the emotion.
Yeah, I think I just want to piggyback on that before you share, if that's okay. One of the things I think is important is being able to identify what is our emotion. Sometimes I think we play the emotional guessing game. What emotion does this person have, or right? And so part of the part of the thing in the communication within it is actually to figure out how people are feeling. So how do you feel about this? Like, what's going on, so that people can actually identify them. Emotion is amoral. It's neither right nor wrong, right? So being angry is not an evil thing. We know that God is angry. We're encouraged in Psalms, be angry and sin not. Like there are times where anger is the right emotional response, but then how are we going to manage it? And so I think part of it is understanding emotion is neither right nor wrong, And so helping people process, and I know with our kids, we've done this at times, like, okay, we know you're angry, right? And so are you like, how are you feeling? You know, you get, okay, you're angry, okay. Well, even though you're angry, the whole sin not side, like, okay, so you're angry, so you're not gonna throw things at your brother, like your hands or your toys, right? And so part of it is being able to talk about emotion, I think helps us be able to talk about conflict. And sometimes the challenge is because we haven't talked about emotion, or we don't have a pathway to talk about emotion. When conflict arises, now we don't know what to do because it seems real uncomfortable to talk about emotion. So I think emotional talk has to actually happen in other parts of the conversation. So that'd part be my thought. So what about you? What can we do to keep from being hijacked by emotion?
So I think that, like, that saying, like, I feel this way or whatever, like, it creates that pause that Dwayne was talking about and gives you that chance. I think twofold. One, if you are going to have a hard conversation, be really wise about the timing. Choose your time wisely.
Yes.
Do not do it when you're tired, hungry, in the middle of something where you can't seek resolution, because really our goal of conflict is to resolve the issue. It's not to beat the person up. It's to resolve whatever's going on. And if you can go in with that resolution mindset, you have a goal. You want to seek clarity. That's great if we're the ones choosing the timing on it. Like if we know, okay, I've got to have this hard conversation. But so often we feel like we're the ones with deer in the headlight. Like, oh, okay, this just happened. They were chewing their food too loudly, and now we have a fight going on. Like something crazy. Being able, when it comes down to it, a root of a lot of conflict, you have to realize and really understand that you can only control you. Mm-hmm. So much conflict comes from the desire to control their response. They didn't respond like they should have, like I wanted them to. And if you are in that middle of a conflict, understanding that you can only control your response and taking that time, creating that pause, and sometimes you have to realize that that person is never going to respond like you want them to because they are not capable of it. Yeah. And it kind of frees you up to investing that angry emotion into it because they just can't. They're not at a place where they can. So I think that rule for conflict, have you ever there's a conflict coming, you've had an argument, and so you play out the conversation you want to have in your head. Like, I'm going to say this, and then they're going to say this, and then, and like you have this all scripted out. So I guess, and so often it doesn't actually happen that way. So my rule for conflict would be manage your expectations and control your response, because that's truly the only thing you can control.
Yeah, and I think that's part of that passage is where he says, hey, you know, why are you angry? Why are you downcast? Sin is crouching at your door. You must master it. Like, you must rule it. You must, because we can't do the other person's stuff. We have to be responsible for our stuff. Even as we talked last week about our words, we're responsible for our words. We're also responsible for our responses, for our emotional stuff, right? So what other rules do you have for conflict? Like, I know there's a whole bunch out there, but for you, what are some of the rules that you're like going, hey, this is an important one? We'll begin with you, Rachel.
I'd say some of our rules are that we don't yell. So, like, we talk, we don't yell.
Yelling does not help resolve conflict.
Right. It may make you feel better at the time of releasing some things, but it doesn't really help resolving the conflict. Yeah. So, no yelling, and
or name calling.
Yeah, no name calling is another rule that we have. And also, so like for us, when we would have conflict, you and I, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, that we would have our fight not in front of our children. Yeah. And so then we would go somewhere else, like go in another room, or we would put a movie on for the kids, something, so that we're not fighting in front of the kids.
Which also helps with the calming down and
Yes,
pausing, because you have
right,
to
yes.
go somewhere else.
Right.
Yep.
And it doesn't help the kids to see their parents fighting over it. Like, there's healthy ways to have conversation. And if we're trying to train our kids in having healthy conversations, let's promote healthy conversation in front of them. And not every conversation that adults have need to be in the presence of children. So
Absolutely.
those are some of our rules.
Those are good rules. What about you, Dwayne?
I'm gonna take the good one. I just
You take the good ones.
So I know years ago, and I can't remember where we heard it or who said it, but there was this whole thing it's in our relationship, and like this whole idea of approaching situations where we are on the same team. And so whenever there's been some sort of situation where I've been wounded by words or actions or something, I've had to pause and just say, okay, so I must have misunderstood that because we were on the same team. And so if I'm really not understanding, say, okay, so this is what I heard, and am I hearing that correctly? And there's been plenty of times like, no. There's been times I've had to say, okay, so what just came out of my mouth is not what I intended. I'm sorry. I know I got to the end of that, and that was not right because I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. And even like with the kids, with other situations of pausing, say, so this person, we're on the same team here. And so there's got to be something going on I'm not seeing. And, a lot of times they're, just with that, okay, there must be something happening I'm not seeing. So I guess is also a rule to like that, what am I not seeing? So trying to get to that. Something else is going on here.
Yeah.
Not always. Sometimes it is the thing right in front of you, but there's been plenty of times that
Yeah.
something else is actually driving the conflict.
Sometimes the issue's not the issue.
Yes.
So
it
what
wasn't the cupboards.
What
Okay,
was the issue?
it was kind of the cupboards. It happened all the time. It still sometimes does.
Thank you for that confession. We will be praying for Pastor Dwayne in just a little bit. Yeah.
It's a time-saving device. Leave the cupboards open. All right, sorry.
Levita, what about you? What are some other rules you have for
Okay.
managing conflict?
I kind of skipped down, but I'm going to say it's really, really important to learn to apologize. And we have told our kids this. You don't have to be wrong to apologize.
What?
I know, crazy. There have been so many times when like something comes out of your mouth and you're like, well, that didn't come out quite like I thought it would. Being able to apologize for the hurt you caused. If somebody comes to, I'm going to use an example that's actually never happened. I didn't do this. Somebody comes to you and like, oh, don't you like my new dress? And you're like, oh, that's ugly. Like sometimes that might just pop out of your mouth. You're speaking the truth, but you hurt them. Yeah. And being able to apologize for like, I'm really sorry I hurt you. It's important because we are meant to be in relationship, and that hurt causes harm in the relationship. And let's say you're not wrong at all. You didn't even say anything wrong. Like they just got offended. It is still okay to apologize for the hurt they're feeling. Like, I'm really sorry what I did hurt you. That was not my intention. And that is just really important in conflict because we are in relationship. We are trying to build back trust, and we have these day in and day out things. So learn to apologize well and specifically.
Yeah. And the one that I would add for another rule that I think is also helpful, and as well as all of these, is keep the lists short.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know how many times in conflict the idea is to pull back things that happened years ago and you've got all these issues, and then all of a sudden you backed up the truck and you're saying, well, there was this and this and this and this and this and this and this. And what happens is you're actually not dealing with the issue because you're dealing with all the stuff. And Corinthians tells us, love keeps no record of wrongs, and that there's an appropriate time for us to address an issue and then move on from issues. And forgiveness, I think, plays an enormous role in this actually getting to the place of reconciliation, because the goal is not to be right, the goal is to be in relationship. And if we're trying to assert our ability to be right, we can wreck the relationship. And that's why I think part of it is, okay, so what are we doing and what are we dealing with to help our relationship for where it is now to move forward? I have one last verse that I just want to think about, and this kind of touches on something you mentioned just a moment ago, Levita. And that is this, that not all conflict can be resolved. So we did ask questions for people to give us answers. Hey, as we talk about communication and relationships, what are some of the things that we asked our congregation, what do you want to hear? And some of the responses we got back were things like, well, what if people don't want to talk with us? What if people don't want? What if people have, and so there's a desire that we have for relationship, but sometimes we don't have the ability to actually mend a relationship. Reconciliation takes more than just one person's will. It requires the will of both parties. And Paul actually talks about this in Romans chapter 12. And I love how he phrases this. Romans chapter 12, verses 18 through 21. It says this, if it is possible. I love how he begins. Okay, guys, if it is possible. And then he adds this caveat, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Like our goal is to live in peace, and just so you know, peace is to be in right relationship. It's this idea of wholeness, this idea that we can actually do life together. And he says, if it's possible to be in peace, as far as it depends on you, live at peace. And he says, don't take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. And do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And I think part of it is Paul saying, hey, guys, listen, there are going to be times in life where you're going to experience conflict. And that conflict is not going to be resolved in the way you want it resolved, maybe not in the time you want it resolved, and it may never be resolved. And so the question is how do you work through this? And I just think this is a really important thing as much as it is possible. And just kind of like from your experience and just on your reflections, what words of wisdom would you give to those who wrestle with unresolved conflict? For those who wrestle with unresolved, because I think this is a big deal because there is so much hurt. Sometimes it's not possible for people to find resolve because sometimes the person you have aught with passes away, or the relationship's so strained that marriages have fallen apart, or kids have been estranged, and nothing you do is like. What wisdom would you give for those who wrestle with unresolved conflict? We'll begin with you, Levita.
When it's not possible, engaging in that conflict continuously is going to continue to harm you and at times give the other person more power. There is wisdom in disengaging from the conflict. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean, because I know if you haven't seen this at me, I have a little bit of a vindictive side. Not so much that I want to be right, but I want you to know you're wrong. There have been many times when I have had to say, okay, I have to disengage, but this is the critical piece and this is your heart matter. That doesn't mean you write them off as a person, because you are still called to see them as a child of God, but not putting yourself in the place of that conflict when there is no chance of reconciliation or resolve. Mm-hmm. So I would say that when you are, okay, repeat the question.
So what words of wisdom would you give those who wrestle with unresolved conflict?
Okay, if there's no way to resolve it, give yourself permission to step back, pray a lot. You're going to have to pray daily. You are, because it's going to pop up again and again and again. But you have to be able to let that piece go and let God handle it, instead of wanting you to have this vindication of being right. Give yourself permission to disengage, but not write them off.
That's right. Good. Pastor Dwayne, you got to follow that up.
She goes again. There she goes again. So I was thinking, like, because there are people from the past. I thought, man, I'd love to have one more conversation with them, and I can't. And so it's in those moments that I'm just like, well, I take a moment and pray for them because I'm thinking of them. And like, okay, there's nothing I can do. Like, because you said, sometimes unresolved conflict is there because there is really nothing you can do about it. There's nowhere, you can't even go to them. And there, if there's hurt or if there's frustration or whatever, and it's not even always a fear of going to them. You just can't. And that's like Levita said, remembering they're a child of God, created in the image of God. And for me, it as a practical thing, it has helped over the years. When something pops into my head, as that person pops into my head, it's like, man, I really wish I could have one more conversation with them. And just God, I don't know where they are right now in the world or with you, but just wherever they are, just please be with them. And that is a practical thing that has helped me over the years with things I can't do anything about, of just pausing in that moment.
That's great. Rachel?
I would agree with both of them, and just the part in that scripture, Paul says, leave room for God's wrath, but I think even just leave room for God. Like, leave room for God to work in that person and in you, right? If we can't resolve the conflict with them, like Levita said, we give them a lot of power if we continually stew over things with that situation. If there's nothing that we can do, we have to lay it in the hands of God and leave room for Him to take care of it, and keep putting our hearts in the place of, I'm leaving room for God. I can't do anything about it, and praying for them. But then also, it says, as much as it depends on you. So leaving room for God to speak to you, like, is there something, Rachel, that you can do? Or is there something, and leaving room for Him to tell us what we can do, and doing that. But then when it gets to the place where, we've done what we can do, then leaving room for God to work.
Yeah. You want to add something?
Well, just something Rachel said, just like that whole the giving them control over you. This is something I've had to talk to my kids and other throughout the years. Is like, when they're having this conflict, and it's like, okay, so don't give them power over you. They are controlling your life. No, they're not controlling my life. Well, actually, you're spending a whole lot of time obsessing over them. I think that's almost idol worship there, because they have created so much dissonance in your life that they have a place over God right now, because you are just so focused on that. Yeah. And just you don't give them power over you. And that obsession can be a power.
Yeah, if there's a person you're at conflict with, and if you see them, think about them, and it causes emotional hijacking, then they have a power over you. And one of the things that I would add, because I think, Rachel, the whole idea of leave room for God, whether it's leaving it for His wrath or His mercy to you, to just in all of this. Even when you're not working on a conflict, doesn't mean God's not working on a conflict. Mm-hmm. And that's why we have to let God do in us what we need to, but sometimes we need to just release them. And when I say release, I'm like, sometimes you just have to let that go. You have to let the issue not be an issue for you. And it may be a difficult thing, but at some point you have to say, you know what, I'm going to, and this is the word, forgive them. Mm-hmm. And the idea of forgiveness is to release someone. Forgiveness does not make a wrong thing right. What forgiveness does is it actually releases you from the burden, or the other person from the obligation that you feel is owed. And I think part of the unresolved conflict is actually learning to allow the grace of God to work in you a work of forgiveness. Forgiveness is a high ideal that we're called to in loving people. And I think it's so interesting that our relationship with God in some ways is connected to our willingness to forgive other people. as Jesus taught us to pray, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us or sin against us. There's this need to release. And sometimes the unresolved conflict just needs to be released into the God's hands and into his care. And trust that he will do what he needs to. I know Rachel and I, we can speak from our experience in our lives of experiencing difficult moments and conversations and fractured relationships and different things that we're just like going, God, we can't do anything about it. We can't change the person, and we have fully forgiven people. And years and decades later, God works an act of restoration or reconciliation. And that's what we continue to trust God. And what we have to do is we have to choose to love the difficult people in our lives, and that includes the people who have hurt us, and to love them as Christ loves them. And this is the whole see the image and the value in them. So we're going to just wrap up here in a moment, and I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I think this has been a great conversation. And I just want to just note a couple things just as we kind of close. Healthy relationships require healthy habits when handling conflict. We actually have to be super intentional about how we're managing conflict, because if not, conflict in our life will cap our capacity and will limit our potential. Conflict is inevitable. We're all going to have to deal with it, so we best figure out how to do it well. And God's Spirit helps us. His Word directs us, and we lean into that, and He has given us His people to help encourage us through this. Conflict is emotional, and I know that even as we talk about this, I know some of you that are watching, there's conflicts that you're a part of, and the emotion of it is still so strong. And that's okay. That's a part of what conflict is. And we want you to know we're praying grace upon your lives because we have a God who longs to not only rescue, redeem, but also to restore. And that restoration includes reconciliation, the restoration of relationships. And again, sometimes we don't get to resolve them all. And we have to be okay with allowing God to do what He can do, but doing what we have to do. And so as we close, so I just, we're going to ask last thoughts from everybody. I know that we're always asking people to kind of your takeaway from this conversation. So let me just ask you just to think about, maybe write down for those who are watching, what is your key takeaway from this morning's conversation? What can you do to improve how you handle conflict? And in a moment, we're going to pray for you. We're going to pray for conflicts that are part of your life. But before we do that, is there any final thought that you would like to add just to the conversation as we get ready to close? Any final thoughts?
Something in the talking about those people that are hard to love. When you've forgiven them, it's not just a one-time thing. And when those things well up again, actually saying out loud, no, I forgave them for that. Yep. And not allowing it to take back real estate in your brain.
Absolutely.
And the same goes for when you have things that you've been forgiven of. Nope, I've been forgiven for
That's
that.
right.
And verbalizing that so that you remind yourself of where you are now.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Anyone else? Okay, great, Ann. Hey, guys, thank you so much. You guys did amazing. Great conversation. Please let us know online how much you enjoyed it. We have the people in the room. They're applauding. They're standing.
Standing ovation.
Like and subscribe. Hit the button right now. But we want you to know we love you and we're praying for you. Let me just pray for you as we get ready to close. Father, you are so good to us. Lord, I thank you that you are the God of reconciliation, that, Lord, you have stepped into a broken world, a world that's filled with conflict, in order to rescue, to redeem, and to restore. And Lord Jesus, I thank you for the grace that you have shown, Lord, the power that is manifest through your being, through your death and resurrection, that, God, you can transform the hearts and lives of people and of situations and circumstances. And God, I know that when we talk about conflict, there's so much emotion because, Lord, there are so many hurts and pains associated. And God, I just ask that, Lord, your grace would just begin to abound and be applied. Lord, to everyone who's listening, Lord, you see the conflict that's in their mind that they're wrestling with. Lord, you see the tensions. And God, you see all the challenges. And God, I just ask right now that your grace, your mercy, and your love would surround them. Lord, I thank you that you're the God who's at work in the midst of our world and in the midst of our circumstances. And God, we're asking that your goodness would be manifest through this. And God, I pray that you would give us strength to do what we need to do. God, would you give us the wisdom to do what we need to do? Father, I thank you for your Spirit that empowers us to love. And so, God, would you just help us, Lord, even as we communicate through conflict. God, thank you for your faithfulness to us. God, bless your people. And Lord, thank you so much for our time together today. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, we want you to know we love you. Hey, as you go through the rest of your day, enjoy the slushy Sunday. Go make a slushy or something out there. But as you go, may the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you. May the Lord be gracious to you, lift his countenance upon you, and give you peace. Have a great day in him. Hey, hopefully we'll see you in-house next week. We'll talk to you soon. God bless.
Wednesday.
Wednesday, the volleys. Thank you.
Yes.
Good reminder. All right, thank you.